Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 44. Today's focus is on getting an overview and acquaintance on the Yoruba folk religion. As with these sessions that are focusing on cultures or peoples or histories that might not be within people's know-how, we'll start with a brief historical look at the Yoruba people, and we'll move on to speak on the folk religion found therein and the diverseness of religion found therein. Mention of their creation story, some of their deities. This case of the Yoruba is definitely a boundary dissolving religion, let's put it that way, in the sense that we're going to find analogies between them, monotheistic religions, polytheistic religions, uh, primitive pagan religions, all in on one bag. So it's a very interesting choice when it comes to comparative religion. And as with all of these such topics, my disclaimer always is that I'm a reader. I did not grow up with the Yoruba. If I mispronounce something, forgive me. So, the Yoruba, as we understand them, have historically lived in Nigeria, in the Yoruba land, also including Benin and Togo. They are one of the largest groups of peoples on the continent. However, you can find them well beyond just Yoruba land. Through different movements, migrations, and history, including the slave trade, of course, you can find Yoruba people all around the Mediterranean, all around the New World, as it was, right? The Americas, the United Kingdom, United States, Brazil, Cuba, Grenada. On the deeper history note, and there's two narratives that I'm going to be talking about here. There is the scholarly narrative, and then there is the, I guess, folk narrative. So we're talking the scholarly narrative here at first, and that is the 8th century BC. You see that the Yoruba are located just south of the Sahara. In the 11th century AD, the Yoruba come to populate and become substantial within Nigeria, modern day Nigeria. And it was here that they had a sophisticated settlements, high wall fortresses, advanced art. They're they've always been very how do I put this? A lot of regalia, a lot of very significant wardrobes, very colorful. And with this time that I'm mentioning, this maybe 12th century, 14th century, it was the sort of golden age for them. And eventually this spells out into a empire, the Oyo, which is a very, I mean, this isn't a history class, but it's a very, it included many of the Yoruba, but not all the Yoruba. There was a rebellion against it. I mean, there's a lot that goes into there. But traditionally speaking, the Yoruba people have had a kind of priestly monarchy. I think they call that theocracy. And of course, a council as well. And of course, as with many of these ancient peoples and especially in Africa, right? We see that music is plays an imperative role in festival and religious ceremony in all manner of life. And we see this in the affluence of African Americans in creation of music, um, this long ancestral um, reverence within music, this propulsion towards um, and so in each of these ceremonies that you'll see, 13 every year, that might have an equivalence with the moon. I haven't dig that deep, but each of them are going to include music, the drum in some form. And of course, when I see the drum, it always makes me think of the earliest days of shamanic religion, spirituality. Now, the more folk narrative, when it comes to the history, would say that the Yorubas are descendants of Ham, which was the third son of Noah, and that the lineage of Ham wedded with the ancestors of the Cushites, or Cush, and that their people inhabited Mecca and Medina over in Saudi Arabia, and that they were there for thousands of years until there was the rise of Islam, and with that, the control of their folk religion. So they were pushed out and they migrated into Africa and intermingled with the Egyptians. Later on, to intermingle um, in Sahel, as it was, south of Sahel, the Borno people. And then eventually making their way to Yoruba land, to this kind of promised land, Ife. And Ife would be likened to their holy place as as Muslim does with Mecca, or Islam, I should say, as Islam does with Mecca, Yoruba folk religion does with Ife. And so this was the land of proliferation, the land of abundance, the homeland as it was, the sacred place. And this was what sprouted many different kingdoms. However, I've been using this term Yoruba, and there have been some speculations as to what Yoruba means, but it is also said that there is no meaning to the word Yoruba in any known language, that the people don't know how they got their name. And so it's this kind of eerie subject, an unsettling mystery. At what point the name was picked up, maybe in these mass migrations, right? Maybe long before then, maybe in some long dead language. So they as a people have never been unacquainted with the rise of Abrahamic religions. They have been alongside all the rises, Christianity and Islam. And not to mention that they were in the area of Judaism when it was arising. And not to mention that throughout all this era, even in the time where they were in Yoruba land, the Ottoman Empire would be sending traders. The Portuguese and the Europeans would be sailing on over. Um, the slave trade would come through. Christianity and Islam were never too foreign to them. And so there is the traditional faith, which is what I call the folk religion. And then there are many of the Yoruba people that also could be Christian, also could be Muslim. They don't, the same family can inhabit or exhibit many different religions, tribal or otherwise. So it's not, the people and the religion are different. I hope you can see how it's not too complicated, but it is more complicated than one might think, right? Like when I say, for instance, something like Norse mythology, it's assumed that all the Norse people in that time believed in this, right? But when I say Yoruba, it's a people, but not all of them believe in the folk religion. There's plenty of Yoruba people that are converts to others. So let's start talking about the actual concepts here. And the first one I want to touch on is what we could perceive as the Yoruban God. And we're going to have to break down our definition of God throughout this, but the name is Olodumare or Olodumare. And this is the supreme God, the owner of it all. There is a transference of the name to Oloran, and that literally means owner. This is the head of the pantheon, and the pantheon is said to contain 1,700 divinities. So it's a level of, there's so many divinities that it reminds me of Hinduism in that way. But this Olodumare is the Lord of heaven, the Almighty, the Supreme, the Sky God, the discerner of hearts, the one who sees everything. And by everything, it is both the external and the internal, what you think and what happens. So is this not already giving you vibes of, God with the big G? This Oloran, and I'm just interchanging the names here. This Oloran is active on all planes of existence. So on the mundane level and on the celestial level, and presumably the microbial quanta, so forth. All things. The king who cannot be found by searching. That kind of gives me a bit of a Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain type of vibe. Omnipotent, forever, the one who created everything, the one who gave the seasons, the one who gave night and day, the one who gave destiny. There's a tale that men used to be immortal. They did not die. And that they would eventually suffer from this. And they begged God, Oloran, to let the old ones die. So man asked for death from God, as an interesting twist, right? And so since you have this Oloran, this creator, this one that has been there since the beginning of time itself, this is an objective force. This is the thing that is behind all things that transpire, that the destinies of mankind are in his palm, as it said. And there's this interesting allegory here to Christianity and Islam, where there are what are the Arisa, or the Orisha, I think it's Arisa, which are these kind of divinities, the ones who act on behalf of Oloran, the ones that punish mankind when laws are broken, the ones who act on the creator's behalf. And is this not the dynamic of God and angels. Except in this way, one might be inclined to call the Yoruba folk religion paganistic or polytheistic. But what's the difference here between the apparent monotheism of Christianity, where there is the one big boy creator that rules it all, that's been around, that's always there, the objective force, and then there are divinities that act on their behalf? Mm. Mm-mm-mm. So, upon death, Oldumer, Olodumare, would be the judger, the one who knows all, so thus the one that can see all, and thus the one that knows if there are rewards to be given in the end. So it's the end of the line of the bureaucratic structure of the universe, right? And all the ones along the way are these Orisas. That nothing can be done against his will, since everything is of his will. You know, anytime you start to deal in these supreme transcendent being categories, it's introduces all sorts of interesting paradox. You know, who created the creator and all that, right? So these differences between the divinities and the creator, right? And this is an interesting topic because you don't really hear about this too much within the folds of Abrahamic religion, but this is allegedly a fairly sophisticated debate within the Yoruba folk religion, is the differences between the Orisas and Oldmer or Oloran. And so it's this question of pure abstract and this question of human qualities, human-ishness, where the divinities seem to resemble more of a human-ishness, where maybe a human being is acted as deified, where they're not so far removed. We saw this a lot in Celtic mythology, where the gods are not too far off from what humans are like. Where, of course, Olodumare, Oloran, is abstract, pure abstract, aside from other characteristics. You know, this complex spiritual being, which in all ways, right? Like what I'm describing, again, it's like, what's the difference here between God and Oloran? And you know, I think that's an interesting question because this introduces a chicken or the egg situation. Were the Yoruba people worshiping this prior to their affiliation with the Abrahamic monotheisms? Were the Abrahamic monotheisms in fact inspired, derived from the ancient Yoruban beliefs? Or did the Yoruban beliefs alter in time with influence from the forming Abrahamic monotheistic beliefs? So, to push forward here a bit, let's talk about the creation story. And we've got two levels here that we're going to touch on. We're going to touch on the abstract level first, and then we're going to kind of spell it out in its more literal story form. So, in many creation stories, especially in, say, like the contrast of the creation story from the Gnostics with the creation story from the Bible of Christianity, the Gnostic creation story gives the background information, gives gives all of the information that wasn't said in the Bible, that what was happening behind the scenes in the spiritual realm. And then you have the story that's given in Genesis, which is only what's happening on the surface. And so in these different very, very detailed, very where we have a lot of information on the spirituality, ideally we can get both stories, the background and the foreground of the creation story. And in the case of the Yoruba folk religion, we have it, or at least as much as I can provide within the time that I give myself to study. So in the beginning, there is the realm of Oloran, which is a realm at the center of everything. Everything that is, was, and ever will be. And all that exists here is referred to as Ashe, Ashe. That this is the thing that came from the center. And that this is the thing that was before all things. Oloran or Olodumare, I really hope pronunciation, puts this Ashe, this creative force, into pots, into containers, and starts to conjure up a way to use these containers to maintain the totality of creation, as it's put. So this reference could be saying that the different facets of existence are each stored in different pots, or that mayhaps this is a multiversal nod, that each pot contains a different creation, you know. And it's interesting to note here, I want to say before I dive more into it later, that every male force also has a female force. Every male deity ascribed to something has a female deity ascribed to something as well. We saw this in the Sumerians and the Babylonians, where there were always pairs of deities. It wasn't just that Neptune alone ran the sea. There would always be a husband and wife that ran the sea or ran the sky or whatever. It was never just one. And in the same way, so each thing, each force contains both the masculine and the feminine, which is a subject that we've touched on before in the course. So in this beginning, right, even before the pots, before the containers, Ashe has a thought. The creative force has a thought. Think of the artist getting an idea, an inspiration, that before there was anything, there was only the creative force. It was not contained in any way. However, this force began to think. And when it began to think, this is the creation of God, or Olodumare, or Oloran. So this is an interesting narrative in respect to how it's presented within Christianity. That first is the creative force and then God, where usually the story is first God, then creative force, right? Interesting twist there. And that when Olodumare or Olodumare thought, he thought of matter. The thought itself became matter. And the matter itself is what is referred to when we say the name Oloran. So allegedly, there is the abstract being of Olodumare, who is the thinker. And then The thought itself, or the creation of matter itself, the medium of the artist, is Oloran. So this is some interesting territory here. But matter, as it said, is a she. So the thought of Oldemare is a he, masculine. But once matter is created, the medium is a she. Oloran is a she. So already we're seeing this interplay, as I've mentioned, that the male force generates the female thing, and this female force creates a male thing. The back and forth, which, that's a distinction from Christianity right there, right? I mean, so the act of thinking creates matter. And I've talked about this before in the course as well. The analogy I used was building a house. Well, first comes the idea, then comes the words, the commands, the gathering of materials, and then comes the building. So the thought leads to the building. And this force of the feminine creation, the Oloran, is called Nana Baruku, the grandmother of all divinities. Nana, Nan, which when I hear this, it makes me think of the Egyptian Nun, which is the primordial waters of which all things came from. And that might be just me making, erroneous ties, but from this, Nana starts to think. Nana gives birth to Mawa and Lisa, or Lissa. And this is the cosmic egg, and the seed of which fertilizes the cosmic egg. So right away, we're getting some interesting stuff here. We're getting an Orphic egg reference, ancient, which we would find later in Orphism, which we would find later in Slavic paganism. So again, I have to ask, how old is this? Did they have this? Or did they get this? Which I realize is a tricky question. I'll have an answer for this later, by the way. So there's a little quote here. Before there was day, before there was night, and before there was a universe, all things lived in harmony in Oloran, which is, the matter that was thought. The cosmic heavens, located in the realm of Ikod Oran, the giant egg that sat in the center of nothingness. So, in various ways, these various cosmogonies that involve an egg, creation of the universe is tied to our own creation in the stories that we tell. Okay, so how are we created? We are created by a force, which could be likened to semen, that meets an egg, right? So in this way, you can see the analogies here. This giant egg is what births these new divinities, these new forces, Mawa and Lissa. And this is the creation of what is called the Uranmol. And the Uranmol is this collection of deities that sprawl forth from Nana and the egg. These thousand or thousands of divinities. And that the Uranmol, this new group of gods, these higher gods, these archetypal beings, want to expand the universe. They want to expand it. And so they go to the creator and they tell him what they want to do. And he says, yes, if you find something to bind it, to give it a border, it can expand, something that can contain it, kind of like the pot reference before. And this is where we see the introduction of the rainbow serpent. Now, I'll talk about this more later. I'm just going to get into this right now. The rainbow serpent, or also what is referred to as Dan, D-A-N-H, coils around the egg. Eh? This is an Orphic egg thing. And the universe is bordered. It is remained firm because of the snake that coils around it. And it is said that someday this rainbow serpent, which they call Ashumer, will become hungry and devour its own tail, Ouroboros. And when that happens, all that is, was, and will be will return to the center as quickly as it was created. So here in Yoruba folk religion, we have the expansion and contraction of the universe, which is modern physics alleyway, big time stuff. And it's accurate. I mean, there are different theories, right? Like astrophysicists say, like the big crunch, the big freeze, right? But one of them is this expansion and contraction, which we've seen in religions beyond just this one. I believe we saw it in Hinduism as well. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. How would they know, huh? How would they know? And this serpent, right? Eating its own tail. I mean, is this you know, the world serpent reference? You know, is this where the Norse got it from, right? You know, I mentioned in the snake mythology talk this kingdom of Dahomey and their preoccupation with serpents. And you know, they had this concept as well of this same serpent, this celestial serpent, this rainbow serpent that has 3,500 coils above and 3,500 coils below. So the reference there is that we saw that with the Aboriginal Australians, and they had separated from Africa at least what, 80,000 years ago. So the question I had earlier of which came first, did the Yoruba people believe this, or did they get it from somewhere else? Well, this implication of this stretching back, this idea stretching back older than 80,000 years or even 120,000 years, says that no, this stuff has been around, that it's been around longer than human history, as we call it. And this implication, this rainbow serpent, isn't just found in the long isolated people of Australia. This is also found by practically the same name, which we'll go over later, in Maya, in the Mayan culture. How? Anyhow, this group of gods, this Urunmul, they created the Orishas, of which I mentioned earlier. So a set of gods creates a further divinity. A greater divinity leads to a lesser, minor divinity. So there are the greater Orishas, and then there are the minor Orishas, which I am by no means going to pronounce them all or to list them all. I could dedicate a whole session to the deities alone. We're talking about very few deities in this session. By comparison. And so these Orishas are messengers. They are a conduit between divinity and mankind. They say 1,001 great Orishas. And that the Orishas, these lesser Orishas, would be the first humans. Um, yes, 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 yes. And that these Orishas create the spirit realm, which is confusing because where was all the rest of that transpiring? Or maybe they make it accessible, I'm not sure. But it's said that if people lead good lives, that they can reach this spirit realm. That if they have a strong and good spirit, their spirit will improve the realm by their being in it. So it's like gathering all of the right people to make a good ambience, which is an interesting note too, right? Like if you're going to have a heaven full of stuffy, dogmatic people, that room is not going to feel so good. That place isn't going to feel so good. But if you're only attracting in people that are warm-hearted, kind, and allowing and um wholesome, genuine, that's going to improve the whole place. And so this final act of the orishas or the orisas is by delegating or bolstering up or providing for leaders on the world, which would be either elders or spiritual kind of gurus or monarchs or whatever, playing their hand to provide specific humans, prophets with access to divinity, of which benefits all, literally all, not just humans, benefits all existence. So that is the abstract form, like I've given kind of like some cliff notes in the background of creation. So let's talk about like the actual story or the surface level story. So the surface level story is, in the beginning there was only the sky and the waters, that which is above and that which is below. We're getting Hermeticism vibes here. And this was all ruled by the mighty Orisha, the council of God. So see right away, they're already there in this story. And that Oloran ruled the sky above, and Olakan ruled the waters below. And right away, I want to point out we see this all across ancient mythologies. We saw this in Sumeria with Ea and Enki. And one day, Obatala, which is another deity, decided to create dry land. That's an interesting contrast because in the creation story of the Aboriginals, the first thing there ever was dry land. He asked for permission from Oloran and for advice from another deity as to how to create this or how to create the upcoming world. And the quote is, "You will need a long gold chain, a snake shell filled with sand, a white hen, a black cat, and a palm nut." So there's a lot to dive into here. It might seem very mundane on the surface. And so Obatala hung from the gold chain and began to climb down from the sky, a long journey down this chain. So, just for your own mind, what is the gold chain representing, huh? Until he finally reaches the bottom. And once he reaches the bottom of the chain, or presumably this dry land, he poured sand from the shell into the mist below. So you could think of this like nebulousness, and that the sand is poured into it. And he also releases the white hen, and the hen begins pecking at the sands and scattering it in all directions. and this creates valleys and mountains. So we're getting shamanic vibes here in regards to storytelling. And then lastly is to plant the palm nut. And that from this palm nut blooms a palm forest. And this land is Afi, the land of which would become Yoruba land, or the sacred holy land. And that here we settled down the black cat to live in this new land, which I want to note just the interesting contrast between the white hen and the black cat. Maybe some kind of yin yang reference there. But eventually, after this creation, Obatala gets bored and he begins shaping figures with clay. So here we see it again. Seen it all around the world. We see it in Christianity. We see it in Sumeria. We see it with some native beliefs of the Americas. What's he shaping out of clay, I wonder? And as he's working on this, he's drinking palm wine. And the first figures that he creates are deformed. And from this, he swears that he'll never drink again. And so he tries to form new figures. And these new figures were man, humankind. And that immediately humankind started to build houses, started to build things. And he was pleased. And so in this story, you see both a creation story for humankind, but also for people who are born with deformities. And you don't see that in religion, as far as I've seen. And with this, all the Orishas were very pleased by all of this creation, except for Oloran. And this was, again, the master of the sea, the god of the sea. He was never told about creation. He was never consulted about this. He was never asked his opinion. So, in anger, he causes the great flood and nearly wipes out all of the creations. So here we have it, a flood myth. And mind you, we see this battle between the sky god and the pissed off, non-consulted water deity with the Polynesians, the original folk religion of what would become the various religions of the Polynesians. That there's a battle between the land and the sea, or the sky and the sea. And there's also analogies here to the Aboriginal Australian beliefs as well. So once the waters had shown the flood, once this power had been shown, people took the ocean, took the power of the sea very seriously. And so all of this, I want to go back a bit. All of this that I've told you, all of everything came from ash, came from life force, came from the creative potential, came from whatever we want to call it. We want to call it spirit? Okay. You want to call it chi? Okay. You want to call it chakra? Okay. Energy. You want to call it energy? Okay. Or ash. Call it ash. That all of it comes from this prima materia, ether, whatever, the word, that all natural things, all powers, all forces come from this. So let's move on and let's talk about the afterlife. So we have a carryover from ancient beliefs in this case when it comes to the Yoruba, which is, if you live a good life, you will reincarnate, and that this is not negative. Reincarnation is something to look forward to. As I've said several times when talking about these ancient beliefs that bleed all the way into the modern, the idea of reincarnation being bitter is only a matter of Hinduism and Buddhism, that this is something to escape. Also, we saw it with the Greeks in certain ways too. But in this way, when talking of the Yoruban folk religion afterlife, if you live a good life, you'll reincarnate. And if you are deceitful, if you are if you are not a good person, then you don't get reborn. Presumably, you vanish. So only those who are virtuous get the privilege of reincarnation. That is quite the twist, right? And that there is this case, which we saw with some Native Americans that we see across the world, kind of speckled here and there, of the belief in familial reincarnation, or what is referred to as a tunwa, which I believe I brought this up in the Afterlife talk I gave a long time ago. And this is the idea of that the family reincarnates into itself. There are names within Yoruba language that literally mean mother returns, father returns, Yetunde, Babatunde. That the family reincarnates into itself. Oh, this is grandma. And that gender is not followed when it comes to reincarnation. It can switch, which is different than other traditional beliefs of reincarnation. Maybe I brought this up in the spiritualism talk, the very first one. Anyhow. And that each time you reincarnate, you bring the wisdoms from all of your former incarnations, and that the child contains all these wisdoms. And so presumably the child is babbling and speechless because the child is still very aware of all of these former incarnations. In the act of acquiring language and sentience as a growing human is to kind of forget these things. But each time you come with the wisdom of your ancestry, your ancestral soul, the accumulation of the knowledge of many lifetimes. So in this way, here is our stark contrast. There is no heaven or hell in this dynamic. There is no punishing, really. I mean, I did note a punishing of non-existence, sure, but that's not vindictive, and it's not a matter of belief. This is a lot softer than that in a very real way. There also is this triple form of the soul as well. So this brings another nuance to the conversation. In the Yoruban culture, the spirit has the force or the breath or the spirit, the shadow, and then this kind of ether, this Ami, Ajoji, and Ori, which is found well beyond just the Yoruba. I mean, when we were talking about Finnish paganism, it was three as well. I'm not going to remember all the names right now, but the Zulu, right, also have the triad of the soul, the guardian spirit, the breath, and the shadow. And that this is a nod to the Trinity, the trifecta, or how threes are always within every spiritual tradition ever, seemingly. We saw this obsession with threes in the Celtic myth. And this also is a nod to their intermingling or their mutual history with the Egyptians, where the Egyptians had Ba, Ka, and Ak, these three forces of the soul, the life force, the spirit force, and the other, the unity of the two. So let's back it up a little bit and let's talk about the deities. So I want to mention again that there are so many and I can't hope to get to it in this session, that these orishas are a intermediary between the divinity, the supreme creator, and existence, between the sky god and all else. And that this can be of benefit to you, that they can work with you in your favor or against you. And that there are also spirits within land, within rivers, mountains, trees, and environments. And that these orishas that live in these places, both divine and worldly, are very human-like, as I mentioned. They marry, they make love, they enjoy music, they party. And so it's an interesting reflection, perhaps a mirroring of mankind in the orishas, in these minor spirits, in these lesser divinities, which kind of is an analogy for mankind by our own conception, right? Lesser divinity. But then there are also these negative forces of the orisha, the ajogun. And these negative forces can cause mistakes, accidents, illnesses, disease. Um, that this is something to be avoided, likened to demons. However, this only happens if one does not live in the proper way or does not pay proper respects to the spirits. So there aren't demons in the sense that they are seeking to do negative for negative sake and maliciously. They are an act of almost judicial quality. Interesting contrast there. Maybe an inspiration that was corrupted by Abrahamic religions. Just saying. So I want to get back to the thing that I mentioned before with the rainbow serpent, this Dahn, Dahn, the African rainbow serpent, which this isn't the Yoruba name. I don't know if this is correct, but I think this is the Dahomey name, which they weren't too far away from each other. And this Dahn is depicted with its tail in its mouth, representing Ouroboros, representing timelessness, representing the border of the universe, representing unity, representing the whole of everything ism. And while there are many lesser deities that belong to different parents, the only deities that are associated with this Dahn, this Dahomey god snake, is Mau and Lisa, those original deities in the early cosmogony. When the rainbow serpent moves around, when Dawn moves around, its excrement is what created mountains. So that's kind of funny, right? The mountains are dung heaps left by the serpent. It binds all things together. So all of existence is kept together by the snake. And so this is a very mixed bag when it comes to how to perceive this entity. It's almost a reluctant entity in the sense that there is no love for this being. There is a power, but there's a malalignment considered here too. That dawn manifests itself as a serpent or as a rainbow, or manifests itself in the umbilical cord, which I referenced in the snake talk too, or it's your veins, or it's how the rivers move, or it's how gas moves out of mountains, or it's how plant roots look. The shape of the snake and these ancient mythological associations with the snake can also be tied to things like sun rays. That this is, when looking at the caduceus and the coiling snake of the kundalini and its likeness to the structure of DNA. The snake keeps things together. This goes deep, man. This is well beyond some flippant myth. This curiosity of humans and mammals being born with a cord attached to them. This is a nod to the snake, to the rainbow serpent. That this deity transports lightning to the earth. And we saw this in pictographs of the Finnish people, I believe, where the snake was tied to lightning, that the shape of lightning is likened to a snake, and that the rumbling sound of thunder in the clouds is that of the snake rumbling around. So this giving of things through the conduit of the snake or through the divinities to people, you know, this giftedness, you know, if you were to be well spirited, it could come from the act of the snake or what is given through the snake via the umbilical cord upon birth, and that those who are well spirited would be well charged with destiny, that they could become leaders of a community, that they could have significant changes to give into the world through the conduit of the snake. So this dude, I mean, this is deep. The other name other than Don, which is specifically the Yoruban name and also the Mayan name. So the Yoruban name is Asumer or Ashumer, and then you have the same in Latin America with the Mayan people with Achumer or Axumer or Achumer. So how, right? And there are many similarities between the Mayans and the Egyptians, of which I've noted in the course before too. So this is to say that there is a mutuality between Africa and South America, that perhaps the natives of South America were not those who came from the Bering Strait. And this is a very confusing topic of which I hope to get to in a future session. But note this coincidence, in quotes, that this rainbow serpent heals the sick, fixes the vision, which, by the way, the vision reference here, the vision serpent of the Mayan people. And that, what's this association with vision? Well, the Aboriginal Australians said and would give credit to the rainbow serpent for providing all manner of water. Okay, now how do you see things? Well, your eyes are pretty wet. Hmm? You know, how does the rainbow come through? Well, the rainbow only happens by means of water. The refractedness of the rainbow's light happens by means of water. All the colors that you see are results of light coming through the vapor of the sky or through the boundary of the earth, the snake. And that this snake, this rainbow serpent, this Achumer, is this personification of the rainbow, and thus why it has an arcing shape. And that it is this kind of representation of the vapor of water and the rain cycle. What does the rain cycle look like? Oh, it looks like a circle. You know, rain falls from the clouds, clouds that creates dew, that creates puddles, of which becomes vapor, and vapor becomes clouds. The serpent eating its tail. And that this is the umbilical cord, as mentioned, right? Yeah. So let's hop off of that and talk other deities while I have a bit of time yet. So as mentioned in the beginning, there was as above and as below, the sky and the water, right? And so this Olokun, this water deity, the watery abyss, the realm of the waters, the realm of sea spirits, that this deity is the master of the deep, the holder of the mysteries of nature, the knower of esotericism. This gives all sorts of vibes. The one who knows of the secrets of dreams, the one who knows the secrets of healing, of psychic ability, of meditation, the one who is capable of bestowing personal empowerment, the one who knows of the past, of the future. This gives me Thoth vibes. This gives me Hermes vibes. This gives me Odin vibes. Olokan. Also, it gives me EA vibes, but that's a bit of a stretch in certain ways. I mean, all of those associations are a stretch in certain ways. And so on the other end, as mentioned, we have Oloran, which is also tied to being a sun deity. And this is what gives life, livingness to all things, things in heaven and earth. So you can think of that more as the vita, or the life-giving energy. And then we have, as mentioned, the Nana Baluku, right? That I mentioned before, the great grandmother, the creator goddess. And then we have associations here with she who had the tools to create the cosmos and the human race in her assistance. She is the patron of witchcraft or spellcraft and herbs, which is a tie to the ancient goddess, right? The ones who created agriculture. Now, this mention that I've given before of Mau and Lisa or Lisa, and interestingly enough, Mau is the moon goddess, and Lisa, although it might sound feminine, is the sun god. And yes, I know I've already mentioned the sun god before. Well, this is a mythology. And that they were said, these cosmic twins were said, as I mentioned once before offhand, that they were the first man and first woman, the moon goddess and the sun god. And that Mawu, this moon goddess, is the one that this is the creative goddess as well, in mirroring of Nana. And that with the help of a primeval serpent and a divine monkey, she would help shape the living creatures out of clay along with, right? Mm, mm. And then you have this other mention of Olokan, which I mentioned once before, an ocean goddess. So there it is again. You have a god associated and a goddess associated with all things, right? There was 2 sun deities. Now there's 2 water deities, each and every time, masculine and feminine. Get used to it. And in the same way, she mirrors in the fact that she has an ineffable wisdom of things, that knows the esoteric realm of dreams, psychic abilities, meditation, and healing, just like the former with Olokan. So Olokan, in that way, is both masculine and feminine, or is a separate entity and a separate entity, or the same entity that exhibits both. Who knows? And that she, specifically she, would be a guide to those of the dead, that those of the dead go back to the waters. I mean, you came from the waters, you came from the waters of the womb, the primeval waters. You return to the waters, especially if we are a society that considers reincarnation. Now, the last one I want to mention is Eshu. And this is what is mistranslated as an evil deity, or what Abrahamic religions would like to call the devil or Satan or whatever. However, this is more likened to a trickster, which is interesting that we have a trickster here, because not only do we find this as a potential root for what would substantiate Loki in the Norse tradition, but since we've made so many ties to the Aboriginals of Australia, to the Polynesians, then this trickster essence, right? So in Aboriginal Australia, we saw it with the crow. With the Polynesians, we saw it with Maui. In the Americas, we see coyote. In Norse, we see Loki. And maybe, just maybe, we can trace all these back to Africa, as it would be naturally implicated with this sort of trickster deity here, Eshu. And then it's not evil, that he will deal misfortunes to those that are spiritually unattuned. That that he is in fact a divine messenger, that he enforces the law, that he knows of the esoteric secrets and of herbal medicines, and that he would be the one in charge of unpredictability, accident, and change. So, what comes with change? What comes with grief? What comes with things falling out in life? Well, the potential for positive spiritual development. So, to call this an evil entity, right? That is very spiritually novice. Now, also, he's the master of languages, huh? So there's another Thoth vibe there. There's another Hermes vibe there. That he brings messages, that he is hiding or lurking around crossroads, gateways. So here's a tie to magic, to Heka of the Egyptians, to Hecate of the Greeks, being a goddess of the crossroads, the trickster, the unknown one, the one that is related to unpredictability, uncertainty, and magic. No secret that he's tied to esotericism. And of course, the thing that I haven't got to mention throughout this session, all the Yoruba ties to the spiritualistic Santeria. So, with that, I hope this session has illuminated you as to the many ties back to Africa when it comes to religious tropes around the world. And I can't draw a clean narrative here, but I hope the fascination, the respect for the Yoruba people has been properly given out throughout this session.